Greetings, I'm MTG Specs and welcome to the House of WUBRG, an EDH deck building series that focuses on 5-colour Commander brews. So today we are building with a tribal lord who loves to have his subjects round for dinner. Hold on. No, likes to have his subjects for dinner. He likes to eat his subjects. He's a cannibal. Atogatog is a WUBRG commander. He is a 5/5 Atog legend. And he simply reads, sacrifice an Atog. Atogatog gets +X until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed Atog's power. This was a creature type which was introduced in Antiquities all the way back in 1994. That was a set that was themed around artifacts. Every card was an artifact, or at least referenced an artifact. And the context was the Brothers' War between Mishra and Urza. See how magic is cyclical, comes back round again. I also found out today, for the first time, that Atog is an anagram of goat, because apparently goats will eat anything, and so will the Atogs. So far, a fairly unassuming commander that's referencing a creature type where there are only 11 Atogs outside of Atogatog himself, and one very odd statue that could become an Atog. So how on earth do we start building a deck like this? The first idea is that we sack our Atogs to Atogatog and utilise changelings if needed. We allow our hungry boys to snack on various delicious permanents, get super buff, and then present themselves to their king Atogatog on a silver platter as a dutiful sacrificial appetizer. We could utilise green synergy with high-powered creatures to draw cards or use fight spells. We could utilise black to deal damage equal to a sacrificed creature's power to target player or to generate treasure tokens. Red likes to fling creatures of huge power at our opponents. And then there's more niche synergies in white and blue, with white gaining life equal to creatures' power, or swapping creatures that have a lesser power in blue. You will notice that our Atogs come with a free sacrifice outlet attached, and that is incredibly valuable in a game of Commander. A free sack outlet requires no additional cost, doesn't need to be tapped, we don't need to pay to be able to sacrifice something, which means we don't often have to wait till our next turn, and we can sacrifice things multiple times in a row. And all of the permanents in our deck are fair game for these ravenous little dudes. Artifacts, enchantments, lands, and even this guy, Chronotog, who can feast on time. And I have no idea how you would utilise this in an effective way. It is not in the deck, and if you've got any ideas, please pop them in the comments below. And with 3 sacrifice outlets, we want to utilise them with various types of enablers. We could include a Mayhem Devil, so every time we sacrifice a permanent, we deal 1 damage to any target. A card like Martyr's Bond, where whenever we sacrifice a non-land permanent, and that goes into the graveyard, each opponent has to sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. We could buff creatures, so whenever we sacrifice another permanent, we could put a +1/+1 counter, just like Bloodbriar. So we've got 2 options on the menu here. We can either make Atog really big, or we can utilise all those sacrifice synergies. I thought to myself, what would I do if I went to a restaurant and I wanted both puddings? I'm just going to have both. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to build a deck with sacrifice synergies, go tall, and combos galore. Loads of different ways to finish off our opponents with this seemingly unassuming commander. And so I'm providing you with a deck list where I chuck everything in, including the kitchen sink, and it's up to you to pick and choose from what you might like, a pick and mix if you will. You don't have to follow the deck list to the letter. I like putting a deck list together like this. It's kind of a puzzle that needs to be solved. Your opponents never know what direction you're going to come at them, even if they've played the deck before. So to fully understand the crazy avenues that this deck can travel, we need to explore recursion. These are the cornerstone of our plans. There are 2 types of recursion in this deck. And the first type is returning 1 or 2 things to the battlefield. We are using Eternal Witness to return a target card from our graveyards to our hand, and that ETB will be part of some major combos later on in this deck. We've got Reveliarch as well to return creature cards with power 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. All of our Hungry Atogs have power 1 and toughness 2, apart from Atogatog himself, so they can be returned using Reveliarch. And then we have a Regrowth as well to return a card from our graveyard to our hand. And probably the most important type of recursion we have in this deck are these kind of face rewards style effects, where we return to the battlefield permanent cards in our graveyard that were put there that turn. And then we have cards like Splendid Reclamation and Planar Birth that are going to return our land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Out of the 11 Ravenous Atogs that we can include in this deck list, we have included 7. Thaumatog and Thanatog will happily split an Enchantment Sunday together, whilst the Thaumatog can eat through our lands and the Thanatog likes to eat from our hand, each of them getting +1/+1 if they do so. Psychotog likes to eat cards from our hand and also to snack upon our graveyard, and says remove 2 cards in your graveyard from the game. Psychotog gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And Thoratog is a unique Atog with an activated cost. However, as long as we tap the forest that we're going to be sacrificing for green mana, it is something we can still do that's repeatable, which is super important in this deck. It still has that free quality. Thaumatog and Auratog love to snack on enchantments. As there are only 5 enchantments in the deck, that might leave the Auratog and the Thaumatog with empty bellies. But if we include Enchanted Evening, all of our permanents can become enchantments in addition to their other types. And you'll notice a sneaky combo on the screen with Aura Thief that says that whenever Aura Thief is put into a graveyard from play, you gain control of all enchantments. This combo is horrible. It's not in the deck, but I've put it there because maybe you're horrible and you would like to use it. Because it says all permanents are enchantments in addition to their other types on Enchanted Evening, that goes for your opponents as well. So this is a 2-card combo to steal every card on the board. Decide if your moral compass will allow you to do that. And we're including a Maskwood Nexus in the deck, which means our non-Atog creatures are back on the menu. I love that 3 and tap to create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter, read 2/2 blue Atog. So we've got a steady supply of snacks for Atogatog. Now, I know that's a lot to digest. Yes, I googled food puns. But this must mean that our Eternal Witness can now be an enchantment creature type or an Atog and has an ETB where it returns cards, and those sacrifice outlets are free. I smell a combo. So we can turn our Eternal Witness into a yummy treat, feed her to the correct Atog with some lands as a palate cleanser, bring her back with a face reward style spell, and target that spell with the Eternal Witness's ETB effect. Don't forget to tap those lands before you sacrifice them so that you can pay for the cost for a face reward, a second sunrise style effect. We can repeat this as many times as we like, and we deserve to slap a green recycle badge onto this deck because we are so environmentally conscious. Probably the Eternal Witness doesn't see that, as she's being constantly fed to a monstrous creature over and over again, but we'll just move past that. We also have a second combo in this deck with Reveliarch, Karmic Guide, Maskwood Nexus, and Atogatog. Karmic Guide and Reveliarch are both Atogs because of the Maskwood Nexus, which means we can feed them to the Atogatog, which means he will get bigger every time we cycle through those cards. So we're going to want Karmic Guide and one of our power 2 or less creatures in the graveyard, which is every creature in the deck except for Korvold. We can evoke the Reveliarch or sacrifice it to the Atogatog, and as it's sacrificed, it will trigger its exit the battlefield ability, which brings that Karmic Guide back with one of our power 2 or less creatures. And then when Karmic Guide enters the battlefield, we return Reveliarch. Now there are 3 creatures on the board, and previously there were none. And we can repeat this, and whatever value creature comes in will trigger. It might be that we are returning a card to our hand. It might be that we get a Tog back, so that can eat something that's on the board already that we're going to return. And round and round and round we go, building up a Atogatog and causing all sorts of mayhem and mischief for our opponents through one of our sacrifice payoffs. Do you have room for a third combo? Let's have a look at how we're going to use Valakut to take down our opponents. Prismatic Omen and Dryad of the Elysian Grove turn all our lands into mountains, and with the Atogatog and his penchant for eating lovely yummy lands, we can sacrifice our lands, bring them all back with Second Sunrise or Face Reward when those lands come into play with Valakut. As long as there are 5 other mountains accompanying him back to the battlefield, we can deal 3 damage per mountain to target creature or player. And the fourth way of winning is using our atogs like a pyramid effect. For example, the Atog is discarding cards from their hand and getting bigger, and then the Psychotog are eating those cards when they go to the graveyard, and the Atog are eating our lands, which are ready to come back with the Second Sunrise effect. Then Atogatog can feast upon all of those increased powers to become really significantly large, maybe even enough to one-shot an opponent. But we spoke earlier about black and red effects that we can use that take advantage of a creature's power. We've got Rite of Consumption for 1 and a black. We sacrifice our Atogatog, and then the Rite of Consumption will deal damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player, and we gain life equal to that damage. We've got Fling and also Thud. I hadn't seen Thud before. Thud is actually cheaper than Fling. I don't know why we still call them Fling effects when Thud's around and is doing the same thing for cheaper. Basically, sacrifice our Atogatog and deal damage equal to his power to any target. Doesn't have to be a Atogatog, it could be one of our Atogs. They can get pretty huge with some of our combo loops. And then we have Chandra's Ignition for 3 and 2 red. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. So these are the permanents that synergize with our sacrifices. Last Love is one of those cards that I've never seen before. When I looked beyond the obvious, I found it, and it is so synergistic with this deck. It just so happens our Atogs are power 1, toughness 2, and they scale with our sacrifices. So if we have an Atog that's munching through our lands, it's getting bigger. That's triggering Last Laugh to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. But because the Atog is getting bigger, it's staying ahead of the damage. Jewelry Master of the Review is a redundancy for our deck. It gets bigger whenever we sacrifice permanents, and then if we can just find some way to sacrifice it, it will deal damage equal to its power to any target. I wonder if this deck's got any way to sacrifice creatures. Oh yes, because we can turn Jewelry into an enchantment, we can turn Jewelry into an Atog, and we've included the big boy Corvold, Fey Cursed King as well. His inclusion is so that every time we sacrifice a permanent, we can draw a card, and because we have lots of sacrifice loops, we can draw through our deck to find other win cons and game-ending play. And then we have the dumbest, most fragile, most easily disrupted combo of all with Barren Glory. If you pull this off, they will talk about this forever. You will sit down at games and people will say, do you remember that time that you won when you had no hand and no permanents? Because we can achieve this, we just have to make it to our upkeep. Barren Glory is an enchantment for 4 white. It reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no permanents other than Barren Glory and have no cards in your hand, you win the game. So in order to pull off this dream moment, you have to use your Atogs to eat all your permanents and your entire hand, and then you need your Atogatog to eat all the Atogs, and then you need the Atog to eat himself, because on his card it says sacrifice an Atog, not another Atog, so he can actually sacrifice himself to himself. And then you have to sit there and wait for everybody else to have their turn, and if someone removes Barren Glory, I'm afraid you are out of the game, more or less, probably. But if you manage to get round and nobody has any enchantment removal, which remember is there's a huge amount of enchantment removal in Commander, you will win the game through this one card. And to help, when I was researching and looking beyond the obvious, I found another card, which is called Karvek's Spite. And Karvek's Spite for 3 black says, sacrifice all your permanents, discard your hand. So it does everything that Barren Glory wants you to do. On top of that, a target player loses 5 life. And I'm okay if you're down to the wire against one other person and you manage to do all of that and kill them with Karvek's Spite, which is going to be a moment within itself. So I've included Transmute Tutors, and if you don't know what Transmute means, basically for 1 and 2 other, you discard the card and then search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost. And I've included 2 Transmute Tutors for converted mana cost 2, 3 and 4, so we can find the really important cards we need to pull off our combo wins. So there are 2 transmute cards that have a mana value of 2. Muddle the Mixture and Shred Memory. Muddle the Mixture being a counterspell for instants and sorcery, so that's extra removal. You can transmute those cards to find key pieces like Fling and Rite of Consumption when we're ready to sacrifice a creature to deal its power in damage. We've got Prismatic Omen and Planar Birth, which are both part of the Valakut combo. I've included Dimir Machinations and also Drift of Phantasm, so that we can find our Eternal Witness, our Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and all of our Atogs except for Atog and Second Sunrise, which, as you know, is a really important part of the combos in this deck. And for a mana value of 4, we have Clutch of the Undercity, which returns a permanent to an opponent's hand and they lose 3 life, and a Dimir Houseguard. Dimir Houseguard is one of our other sacrifice outlets. You can sacrifice a creature any time to regenerate Dimir Houseguard. That helps you with the Baron Glory combo. It helps you in other ways when you need that sacrifice synergy. More importantly though, both those cards with that transmute cost will help you find Face Reward and Cosmic Intervention when you want to return any permanents that have gone to the graveyard that turn. The Maskwood Nexus, and actually a number of our board wipes. Speaking of removal, because this is a deck that needs to survive the early game whilst we're ramping and finding the pieces we need, I've included board wipes and counter spells. Mandate of Abaddon synergizes with a high power, which can be any of our Atogs at any time. Supreme Verdict, an uncounterable board wipe, and Damn, which I really like because in the early game we can specifically target a creature, or later on we can decide to wipe the board. I've included these 3 excellent counter spells because we need to look out for the Dalvey Voidwalkers, the Rest in Peace, and other cards that will affect our graveyard. Stubborn Denial synergizes really well with the synergies around creatures with a high power. We have Arcane Denial to counter any spell, and an Offer You Can't Refuse, again countering a non-creature spell and giving our opponents some treasure tokens. And in terms of card draw, we are leaning into green. Green does this so well. And there are 2 types of card draw based around power in green. We've got the sacrifice creature version, so greater good, sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 cards. I have seen this deck draw tons and tons of cards. Remember, we've also got loads of ways to recur those creatures so that we can do it again. Life's Legacy draws cards equal to a sacrifice creature's power, and Momentous Fall does the same thing, but then includes gaining life equal to its toughness. And then we've got those cards that straight up just draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. Garruk, Rishkar, and Return of the Wild Speaker all do this incredibly well. With Rishkar's expertise, we can cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost, and Return of the Wild Speaker can increase the power of our Atogs by +3/+3, meaning that if we're about to sacrifice them to Atogatog, they already have a +3/+3 bonus to make that sacrifice even more impactful. In terms of ramp and mana, I wanted this deck to be as cheap as possible, so I have included a basic land package, prioritising the types of basic land we need at certain points in the game. There are more forests so that we can get to our ramp quicker. I've included 7 islands so that we're ready to use our counter magic. We've got 4 mountains because mountains are really important synergising with Valakut, and the green staples here to help us find those basic lands, Cultivate and Rampant Growth. And we've got those green staples to find the lands that we need. A Lotus Cobra that works beautifully with this deck to give us different colours of mana so that we can get our command out early on. And there's that high market, another way to sacrifice our creatures to gain 1 life. Sometimes we're just helping a creature avoid an exile, which is a bit backbreaking in this deck because we have so few Atogs, but sometimes it's a key part of our win cons. So this deck is the very definition of having your cake and eat it. It draws from every flavour of the colour pie, and to be honest, for me, it's more about the journey than the end result. It can win, but there are so many avenues to win, and there are so many ways it can fall apart as well. From the commander looking janky and strange and odd to the interactions within, people will remember this deck. It's so much fun to play, and I am not guaranteeing that you will win, but you will, and it will be amazing. And when you don't, you'll have so much fun putting the pieces together. I think that EDH, part of it is telling a story with the people that you're playing with. So why not tell a story about this really odd, ravenous fringe race of strange little beings, and the fact they cannot keep your permanents out of their mouths. If you enjoyed this content and it helped you in some way, inspired you or entertained you, a like and subscribe would mean so much to me, and it means that I'll keep opening the doors to the House of WUBRG with 5-colour deck techs, which I'm really enjoying, and I hope that you are too. Next week, a commander so new, Wizards haven't even released it yet. Niv Mizzet Supreme, another 5-colour commander with an interesting deck building restriction, which is right up this channel's street. If you watch my Omnath video, if you haven't, go and watch my Omnath video. That has a restriction about building with cards that have got 3-coloured pips in their casting cost, and then Niv Mizzet Supreme is all about cards that are exactly 2 colours. Cannot wait to build it and introduce it to the roster, invite it into the House of WUBRG, and I invite you to subscribe so that you can see that deck next Monday. He will be part of my channel's first ever gameplay footage. On camera, myself and members of my playgroup playing the 4 decks that I have covered in my deck text. That's Tom Bombadil versus Omnath versus Atogatog versus Niv Mizzet Supreme coming in May. So hit that subscribe button so that you can see how the decks play against each other. 4 5-colour decks battling it out. Maybe it'll inspire you to build a 5-colour deck. Until then, I hope you look beyond the obvious and make some other weird creature type viable in EDH. Let me know about that. Pop that in the comments. Maybe I'll build a deck out of it. Until next week, thanks for watching.